to the Florida Veterans for Common Sense meeting here in January 2026. So with no further ado, then we'll move right into our program. And I'd like to introduce Emily La Coz. And Emily is something that we need very much now, and we have to somehow develop it more than it is, and that's independent media. Because as we know, sitting in this room, corporate media basically has become propaganda outlets. So independent media is even more important than ever. And Emily is the executive director of the Searchlight. And the Searchlight, their mission is to do independent investigating reporting. So we expect a lot from Emily in this area on local reporting. I have some ideas for her, and I'm sure people in the audience may have ideas too. And Emily has a terrific background. She worked for several different news organizations, but before her job with Searchlight, she was a reporter for USA Today, and she ended up as an investigative reporter with the Sarasota Herald Tribune, and she's won several different awards. I'm not going to go through all those awards, but she's really a first-class journalist, and that needs to be supported. So with no further ado, Emily, the floor is yours.
It is my honor to speak to you all, and a special thanks to Rich for introducing me to the group. So as Jean said, I am the executive editor-in-chief of Suncoast Searchlight. We are a new nonprofit newsroom, new in that we just launched not even a year ago in February of 2025, serving Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto counties. Our mission is to produce investigative and explanatory reporting for those three counties, for them and about them. We are a very small newsroom. I don't know if any of that's up on the screen, but it is me, a development director, and 4 reporters. And one of those reporters is my deputy editor. So we're a small newsroom. We are going to be adding an additional reporter soon, so stay tuned for that. That person would be dedicated solely to local government. And what we do is sort of fourfold. We do original journalism in-house. That's our own reporters doing their own reporting and producing our own stories. We do collaborative journalism, so we partner with local media outlets here in town, double byline collective projects with them. We do supportive journalism. We provide resources to those other news outlets to help them elevate their stories. For example, one of our reporters is a data reporter. We hired her because she's got skills in coding and can do lots of advanced data work. That's something most newsrooms don't have, and so we will loan her out to other newsrooms if they need help doing complex data analysis and data reporting and coding. And we do community engagement. So that is the 4th prong of what we do. We just launched in November a series of community engagement events. Our first one was me doing a Q&A with Dean Baquet, who's the former executive editor of the New York Times, who came to Sarasota to be with us, which I thought was really cool, that somebody of his caliber decided to come and spend some time with us in Sarasota. So we did a Q&A with him, and he also came to our newsroom to engage with our journalists, and I invited journalists from all of the other newsrooms to come to our newsroom and meet with him as well. The reason I did that is because part of our mission is not just to be another news outlet in this community and to compete with the existing news outlets. Those news outlets don't need any competition. They're dwindling, as I'm sure you're all very aware of. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. What we want to do is elevate the entire media ecosystem here. And so that is why we don't consider them competitors. We consider them colleagues. And when we have something cool that we're doing, we want to bring them into the fold and help them. A lot of those news outlets these days can only afford, fresh out of journalism school kids, as I would call them, 20-year-olds who are just getting their start. They don't really have the experience, and they don't have the infrastructure in those newsrooms to help them. When I started in the 90s, I worked in newsrooms that were robust and thriving, and you had all these senior reporters around you, and you could listen in when they were making tough, interviewing tough sources, and they could come over to your desk and help you with a problem. And these newsrooms now are mostly empty, a shadow of their former selves. And so these kids are kind of on their own. And that's why we do what we do. We really want to help those kids and those newsrooms to do the best that they can with their limited resources. Some of the newsrooms that we have partnered with, the Bradenton Herald, or who have picked up our work, that's the other thing I neglected to mention. Everything that we write, we put on our website and in our newsletter, and we also tell everybody out there, hey, you can republish us completely for free. And they have. And so you might have read our work and not even realized it was ours because you saw it in the Bradenton Herald or the Sarasota Herald Tribune or Sarasota Magazine. Maybe you listened to a story that we produced on WSLR. We turn our stories into scripts for Johannes, and he broadcasts them on WSLR. Tampa Bay Times has picked up our work, as has the Orlando Sentinel and even the Miami Herald. So we put it out there, and they can republish it for free. Our only rule is please don't change anything unless you find a typo, and then please let us know, and we will change it on our end too. So we're doing really like high caliber journalism. The journalists that I hired in our newsroom are very experienced. My deputy editor / senior investigative reporter was my colleague at USA Today, and as well as at the Sarasota Herald Tribune, Josh Salmon. Alice Herman, who does a lot of, she's done a lot of reporting on New College, a lot of reporting on immigration. She's done some great reporting on the fracturing of the Republican Party and the kind of the rise of the MAGA movement in Sarasota. She comes from The Guardian US, so moved here from Madison, Wisconsin. Kara, our investigative data reporter with a master's in data journalism, came here from Washington, D.C. And then Derek Gillum, we snatched from the Herald Tribune. They were not very happy about that. He's a great local reporter. So these are experienced journalists. We're not, just rogue people. We all come from traditional backgrounds, but really trying to use our skills to do the kind of journalism that sadly we've seen a lack of, which is that in-depth stuff. Local journalism in our market, they do a great job of covering like the surface level stuff, what's happening, but they don't necessarily do a good job of telling you why it's happening or how it's happening, not because they don't have the capacity or the ability to do it. They just don't have the resources to do it. They are running and gunning, and so we see that as our sweet spot. We'll let them break the news, but we'll circle back and try to dig into it and do more investigative and explanatory pieces. So some of what we've reported on since we launched 11 months ago, we did a story about the rent-a-cow loophole, which is the Greenbelt law, which allows ranchers, it was designed so ranchers and farmers would have an incentive to hold on to their agricultural land much, much longer instead of being pressured to sell out to developers. Well, developers figured out a way to exploit that by buying up that land anyway and then renting some cows from ranchers and getting the same tax benefit. And so they would get, hundreds of acres, sometimes thousands of acres, and pay like $100 a year in property taxes because they have a few cows on it. And they would do that until they got ready to develop it, and then they would develop that land. And so we analyzed all the Greenbelt agriculture that was held by some of our largest development companies here in town, like Benderson and, actually Benderson didn't really have much, but Neil, Neil had a bunch and Baroof had a bunch, and there were others, and found that there's millions of dollars in tax revenue that we were not collecting because they had a few cows on that property, which no disrespect to them. If I could put a goat in my backyard and pay $5 a year in property taxes, I would do it too. But just to expose like, hey, this is happening and maybe somebody ought to fix the loophole. That was one of the first stories that we did. We've done a lot of reporting on New College and sort of behind the scenes, what's been going on there, some of the chipping away of financial oversight and the concerns that people have about the leadership change at that institution. And then we've done a ton of reporting on the proliferation of community development districts, which probably a lot of you know what they are without knowing what they are. So Lakewood Ranch is a great example of a community development district. It's a special a designation that developers can go and get if they want to develop a huge tract of land and turn it into housing. They can go and get a designation as a special district that allows them to take out municipal bonds, tax-free municipal bonds, and sort of gives them the same powers as a local government. So they take out massive amounts of bonds that helps them develop these subdivisions, and then they tax the homeowners who purchase in that subdivision. And so anybody who purchases a home within these community development districts, on their tax bill, they're paying not just local government, but they're also reimbursing the bonds that the developers took out to develop that subdivision. And because it operates like a little government, there's a little board of directors, sort of like AKA a city council or city commission, if you will, that the developers get to appoint people to serve on that board, and that board determines whether to take out more bonds, and basically sort of runs that development district. And it takes a very long time for residents to actually have enough of a presence on the board that they get to determine what to do with that money. And so the end result is you're buying into these subdivisions and footing the bill for things that developers can continue to tax you on for a really long time. And that is one of the most popular ways, in fact, that our region is being developed right now. So we've written about that. We also did a joint investigation last summer with Florida Trident, which is another nonprofit newsroom, about Sarasota County's response to the devastating hurricanes that we had and all the flooding, especially during Tropical Storm Debbie. And so we investigated the multiple failures within that county that exacerbated the flooding that we experienced. And as a result of that investigation, the city rushed the creation of a standalone stormwater division and rushed the appointment of a new stormwater chief, and one of the assistant county administrators resigned shortly after we wrote that investigation. So it was pretty immediate impact. We're really proud of that. We also wrote a story over the summer that we thought would be a pretty easy story about the decline of kindergarten vaccination rates. But what surprised us was how few pediatricians were willing to talk to us on the record about that decline. And most of them told us that they were afraid to speak out because it's been so political lately. They were afraid that if they talked about their, about what they believed was maybe putting people at risk, that they were going to be doxxed or attacked or in some way, shape, or form suffer repercussion by talking about it. And so we wrote a story about, hey, not only are kindergarten vaccination rates declining, but there's this real fear within the medical community about speaking out. And then we've done a lot of investigations about the local impacts of national immigration reform, sort of in line with our belief that, we need to be telling stories about what's happening nationally and how it's impacting us locally. So those are just, I could keep going, but those are just a few examples of some of the investigations that we've done. And many of those have been, as I mentioned, published in some of those mainstream publications. So the reason that we exist is actually the foresight of the Barancik Foundation. As many of you may know, the Charles and Marjorie Barancik Foundation is a large family foundation based in Sarasota. And it was them who had been receiving a lot of requests by media organizations. Hey, could you please fund a reporter in our newsroom? Hey, could you please fund this initiative in our newsroom? And they said, rather than funding these specific initiatives or positions within these different newsrooms, let's create a newsroom that can serve all of these other newsrooms and kind of elevate the entire media ecosystem. And so they had a first iteration, which they called Community News Collaborative, that was a very short-lived. I think it lasted 8 months. They gave a grant to WUSF, the public broadcasting radio station that's based in St. Pete and housed within University of South Florida, to host this newsroom that would do community news and act like a wire service that other news organizations could pick up their work. They folded that after about 8 months because the journalists that were hired were doing very, it was good journalism, but it was very basic. It wasn't moving the needle. It wasn't in depth or investigatory. And so they closed that newsroom, went back to the drawing board, established a standalone 501c3, and went looking for people who could serve on a board that would run this new nonprofit newsroom. And we've got a fantastic board of directors. We've got Keith Woods, who formerly was with NPR. He just retired in April from that position. Kelly McBride, who's with the Poynter Institute, which is one of the premier journalism organizations in the country. Chris Davis, who used to be the investigations editor at the Sarasota Herald Tribune back when it was a vibrant, 150 plus member newsroom, and is now an investigations editor at the New York Times, and several other people who are just fantastic on our board. And they hired me to birth this newsroom, I guess, if you will. So I left USA Today and worked with the board to establish our mission, hire these journalists, met with community stakeholders. I met with editors of all the publications in our 3-county region and asked everybody, what are the stories that are falling through the cracks? Or what are the stories that we're covering, but maybe not covering in depth enough? And came up with a list of topics that became the stories that we pursued last year. So development was a big one. Everybody was really interested in the ways in which our communities were being developed, and the loss of land for housing projects and the perceived influence of developers on our local commissions, which we're still trying to scratch at that. That will probably be something we cover until we're all dead. New College was another one. Everybody was really curious about the transformation happening at New College and wanted somebody to dig into that. And stormwater was a big one as well. Of course, we had just suffered catastrophic damage from back-to-back hurricanes. And so those 3 areas in particular, we put a lot of energy into this past year. We're constantly meeting as a newsroom to talk about the evolving landscape. Obviously, news keeps happening and we're trying to keep up with it. And my gosh, I wish I had like 30 more reporters, because there are stories that are falling through the cracks right now that I know that are happening and we're trying very hard to get at. But we, like other newsrooms, are dealing with limited resources and trying to do the best with what we've got. To that, I want to kind of talk about the media landscape just a little bit. To tell you why we exist and why it's so important for newsrooms like ours to exist. In 2004, there were nearly 9,000 newspapers in total nationally. 20 years later, there are less than 6,000 newspapers nationally. An average of 2.5 newspapers close every day. And more than half of the nation's 3,000 plus counties have little to no local news sources. Even those that do have news sources are skeleton crews. So when I moved to Sarasota from Mississippi, which is not where I'm from, you can tell by my accent, I'm from Wisconsin, but I lived in Mississippi for 12 years. That's where I started my newspaper career. And honestly, never thought I'd find a more interesting state. But then I moved to Florida and like, wow, this is really interesting too. But I joined the investigations team at the Sarasota Herald Tribune in 2015. And we still had that beautiful building on Main Street, that glass architectural marvel, and just bustling with reporters and people there, even at 2:00 in the morning and on the weekend. And it was just amazing. Today, there are 8 reporters at the Sarasota Herald Tribune. And it's not in that building anymore. I was part of the newsroom when we moved next door into what's now the Truist Bank building. And we had 3 floors on the Truist Bank building. And then we had 2 floors on the Truist Bank building. And now we have 1 floor on the Truist Bank building. And we don't even need that floor. They could probably operate in a much smaller place. 8 reporters. And that's not even reporters, it's also editors. They have 1 photographer left. And it's really hard for them to do the same level of journalism that they were doing in the past. So And they're also facing, I still remember being a reporter there every morning. You'd go to a meeting and you look at the metrics and you could see what people are clicking on. And nobody's clicking on investigations. They're clicking on, dog saves family from a fire, or, hot mom sounds off at school board meeting. Like what people click on is you don't even want to know. So it's hard, right, to make a case like, hey, let's spend a lot of money doing a deep investigation when you could just go out and find a hot mom and you've got your quota of page views for the day. The Bradenton Herald, same thing. They've got about 6 reporters. Circulation at these 2 giants, they used to be such giant institutions, is just decimated. And that's obviously not our market alone. Like, this is happening with daily newspapers across the country. Like the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette last week announced that it was closing its newspaper after over 300 years of service. These, people have groused about the news as long as I can. I remember my dad getting pissed and throwing the newspaper in the trash at least once a week and complaining about them, but we still subscribe, right? It's the Fourth Estate, it's the watchdog. And say what you will about it, but it served a function. And they're so limited now. Like, we fight for public records. And Florida's as a reporter, everybody knows Florida's the place to be because they've got the best sunshine laws, the best public records laws. And those are constantly under attack. And even the ones that exist, public agencies are flouting left and right. We're consistently cited fees for public records that we know should not cost $7,000, but that's what they're citing us. We just got an estimate for that last week on some records that we requested, $7,000, even though another agency gave us similar records for free like 2 months ago. They're citing excessive fees. They're not responding. They're pushing back. They're denying, knowing that most news organizations don't have the resources or even wherewithal to push back against it. And so it's really become difficult for reporters to do their jobs. Long gone are the days when newspapers had their own in-house attorneys and could push back and win public records. Now it's very difficult for journalists to do their job, not just in Florida, but nationwide. I'm sure you all follow the headlines and are aware of some of the ways in which the national administration has really tried to hamstring an independent and free press. For example, Trump barring the Associated Press from the White House after it declined to call the body of water just west of us the Gulf of America because it reports for an international audience, and internationally it's still referred to as the Gulf of Mexico, but he barred them from the White House based on that, their editorial decision. The Department of Defense barring all news organizations that refuse to sign a policy that basically defers to the Department of Defense on what they can report on. Trump suing news organizations for coverage that he doesn't like. Many of those cases have been dismissed, but some of them have been settled. And, Congress cutting funding to public broadcasting, right? The list goes on. And this isn't, I'm not trying to be like political or pro or against any type of administration, but just like objectively, the pushback to a free and independent press has been unprecedented in the past year. And so that's been felt acutely by local news organizations, especially those that are, mainstream, those owned by Gannett, which owns the Sarasota Herald Tribune, or McClatchy, which owns the Bradenton Herald and the Miami Herald. These organizations are facing tremendous pressure to not just bend to the will of the administration, but also please their shareholders. And so there's just a lot that's going on that's not just detrimental to reporters, but detrimental to people who rely on independently verified information. And with the rise of AI and social media, there's so much information out there that's really difficult for the average person to assess whether it is legitimate or not. And so the need for a free and independent press has, in my opinion, never been greater. And so that is what we do, and that is what we're trying to do. Suncoast Searchlight is in really good company. Across the nation, there has been an explosion of nonprofit newsrooms, both nationally, so ProPublica, which did a great job of covering Clarence Thomas and the conflicts that he accepted a lot of money from influential people whose cases were before him, which I think 20 years ago probably would have run him out of that position, but now it doesn't seem like anything matters. But Mississippi Today, Flatwater Free Press, Honolulu Civil Beat, Wisconsin Watch, Cal Matters. There are just so many great nonprofit newsrooms across the country right now. And that is seen as sort of being the new iteration of what the media will look like. So I think at some point we might not have a Herald Tribune, which is really sad. That's where I spent part of my career, and I love that newsroom. But nonprofit newsrooms seem to be the next wave. And so what we're doing is not unique. Our model is similar to those other organizations, but we're doing our best. I want to be mindful of time. I think I've yammered on for about 30 minutes now, so I'm going to end and open it up for questions.
Terry Ann Bayoret. I'm wondering, Bradenton has a few people, and Sarasota has a few people. Have they ever thought of merging to double the amount of people and centralize it, maybe in Sarasota, so that they can do a little bit more?
Well, that's a great question. Sarasota Herald Tribune is owned by Gannett, and the Bradenton Herald is owned by McClatchy. And I don't know I think maybe one chain would have to sell the newspaper to the other chain if for that to happen. I do know that there's the opportunity for collaboration, and my dream would be, and we're still new and establishing these relationships, but I would love to collaborate with both those newsrooms and maybe others on even larger investigations. That I think that would be amazing. So, yeah, but I don't know if they've ever considered selling out to each other and merging them.
So, Emily, here's a question from Cody on Zoom, and he wants to know if you would consider expanding your coverage to Charlotte County.
That is not the first time we've got that question. I would love to expand to Charlotte County. There's so much that is going on there. We would need another reporter to do that, and if anybody would be willing to fund that position, I would gladly hire somebody to do that.
Hello, I am in fact encouraged about what you said about nonprofit newsrooms, and that's primarily because I think ever since the Fairness Doctrine was eliminated, profit-making news organizations have been a big problem, and I think that the idea of moving to nonprofit for news is an excellent idea. So that is encouraging news from all the bad news that you gave. And isn't it true also that there's actually relatively few organizations that run basically all the media these days?
Oh, yes, there's been a huge consolidation of media in the hands of a few. I mean, you look at Gray owns lots and lots of television stations. Fox owns lots of television stations. I'm blanking the other one that's a really big holder of television stations that got dinged a few years ago by all of them having the almost like exact same segment. And the same thing for newspapers. It's Gannett, McClatchy, Lee. Those are sort of the big ones. I understand the economy of scale, but you sort of see a McDonald's effect. They all start to look the same. There's a lot of sharing as well, which there's always been some amount of sharing, but because of the dwindling resources, it's pretty common now to pick up the Sarasota Herald Tribune, for example, and see articles that were written by other Gannett reporters throughout Florida or throughout the nation. And so they're supplanting what would have been local news coverage, but we just don't have the resources for it.
Do you have a hard copy format of what you're producing, or is everything online, or is there a combination of both? And what is for each article, is there a turnover period, or you follow one article through?
So we publish all of our news stories to our website. We also have a free newsletter that we put out every Friday. We try not to bombard people with it, so it's just once a week where we put our news coverage, and then I curate what I think are about the 10 best stories from other media outlets across our region. The only time our stories are in print is if a print publication picks them up. So if the Herald Tribune picked up a story of ours a couple weeks ago that was in print, the Bradenton Herald will pick up a story and will be in print. But we ourselves don't have a print product. And then we do, for Johannes at WSLR, whatever stories he says he wants for his news program, we'll turn them into radio script, and then our reporters will record them and he'll put them on the air. So
could you explain where the Observer organization fits within the area news business, and whether there's any potential for them to become more active on the typical investigatory work, notwithstanding the predilections of Matt Walsh?
Yeah, the Observer is, they do a great job with local coverage. And even when I was at the Sarasota Herald Tribune, I was amazed at how well they were covering city and county commission meetings. But they don't do investigations. And I met with them at the same time as I was meeting with other media partners. And I mean, they're very kind, and they've come to some of our trainings. We'll do occasional trainings for other journalists. Like we've done like a data training and an investigative training. Anyway, they'll send their journalists. They're great partners in that way, but they just don't pick up our work, and they don't do investigations, and that's their sort of their model. And so maybe there's a way for us to collaborate further at some point. There might be some area in which there's a crossover interest, but right now there's not.
I wasn't clear on your business model. I think you have funding for a certain period of time, or is there perpetual funding, or what does this look like 5-10 years down the road?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And I just brushed right over that. So the Baranczyk Foundation gave us seed money to start. They really wanted us to exist. And so they said, here's some money to get up and going, get a proof of concept, and have a runway. But at a certain point, they can't be our sugar daddy. And so that's why we hired a development director in September. Her job is to help us come up with revenue through philanthropic contributions and through grants and sponsorships. I know other nonprofit newsrooms will have a corporate sponsor for their newsletter, for example. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at as well. We've already we just did a news match in November and December. So we'd raised a certain amount of money, and then anybody who donated up to $1,000 was matched, up to $1,000. And so we were able to raise $80,000 the last 2 months, which is fantastic. So we need to keep that momentum going and find a steady stream of revenue, or we won't survive. We feel pretty confident that we will be able to. Lord knows this is a wealthy enough community that people could, if they wanted to, support us. We need to get the word out that we exist. We need to make our case that what we do is important. Maybe you might not like every story that we write, but we feel like every story is important. And we feel like at the end of the day, the most important thing is to have a free and fair press, to have reporters at public meetings, to have a watchdog. Sometimes just a reporter at a meeting is enough to signal to elected officials that they're being watched, that they're accountable to us, to the public. And And so we're committed to making sure that we're there.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is, can you do an investigation and the fine work that the Florida Veterans for Common Sense are doing?
I don't know if you want us investigating you.
Oh, no, it's intense and it's fabulous. So
Okay.
I think it'll work. And the other question I have is, are you aware of, or have you done an investigation of this felon who is now running for the Manatee Commission?
Johnson?
The guy who stole the podium of Nancy Pelosi?
We just found out about that ourselves. I included that in my newsletter on Friday that he was running, and we were talking about it today at our team meeting. Fun fact, and I didn't know this, but he technically didn't steal a podium. He stole a lectern. So this is a lectern, and a podium is like a riser. I didn't know that. So we were like, actually, it's lectern guy. But yeah, we're definitely interested, and yes, he's on our radar.
Emily, here we have another question from Cody, and he'd like to know how much it costs to fund a reporter.
Our pay scale is flexible, and it's also really good to be able to afford to live in this area. So it's anywhere from about $70,000 to $100,000 for a reporter position. That's just their base salary. That doesn't include salary, like the benefits. So you can add about 15 to 20% to that. And we intentionally, if that sounds high, and I know that's a really good salary, it's because it's very expensive to live here, and we're looking to hire reporters who are experienced. So getting people with a good 5-10 years experience under their belt who are really heavy hitters.
The next question's from our den mother, Rana, and she'd like to know, would it make sense to have a subscription?
Well, we are intentionally not behind a paywall. We're intentionally free. That said, it would be amazing if she could subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. The more subscribers we have, the more it shows that people value what we do. The way we measure success is how many people are reading our newsletter, how many subscribers do we have to our newsletter, how many people are on our website, how many media partners are picking up our work, and does our work have an impact, which is measurable by decisions that might be made, like after the stormwater investigation, they fast-tracked the creation of a standalone stormwater division. That we counted that as impact. These are the things that we can take to potential funders and say, see, people care about what we're doing. Look at all the people reading our work. Look at all the media partners picking up our work. So that to us means the world. That said, if she wants to be a donor, she can also donate to us. We accept one-time donations, and we've got dozens of people who also kick in every month. So $5 a month or $10 a month. If you wanted to do that, you can do that as well. And our website's really easy. It's suncoastsearchlight.org. And you can see right on there at the very top, subscribe to our newsletter. I think it's the support menu item, you can see how to donate.
As an investigative news organization, I imagine you guys ruffle some feathers. Are there any retaliations or threats that you all get from time to time, and how serious do you all take them?
It's a really good question. We one of the first stories we wrote, we got a 3-page letter that it wasn't threatening, but he was really mad at us, and I think it was asked us for a full retraction, a takedown of our story. His attorney was CC'd on that letter. Definitely got our attention. We went through it. We went through the story that we wrote. We went through the letter and his demand, and we were able to respond point by point and reassert, nope, the story is 100% accurate. Here's why. Here's this. Here's that. Here's the other. So we've had that. We've also had we had an angry voicemail directed toward one of our reporters after a story that she wrote that said that she should be hanged. He didn't say that he would hang her, so it wasn't a direct threat. But we discussed that at length and debated whether or not we ought to file a police report. So, knock on wood, that's sort of the extent of it at this point. But at USA Today, my colleagues had been through much worse. I've had colleagues who have been doxxed, have had entire internet communities after them, who had to remove her social media accounts for a while and file police reports. It can be really scary. And I get it, right? Like, some of the things that we write really make people angry and can cost them their job, their reputation, their livelihood. And we don't take that lightly at all. It's a huge responsibility, which is why on our most high stakes work, we have a law firm vet our stories from top to bottom to make sure that everything that we've written is substantiated, it's accurate, it's responsible. That doesn't stop people from still being really angry at us. And I get it, but yeah.
So this question's from Julie. She says, the way people consume news, how often and from where, appears to have changed. What do you believe is the best way to educate people on how they can validate news sources?
That is such a great question. And I've got 2 boys at home, 19 and 12, and I have a lot of conversations with them about it too. Oh, Mom, I saw this thing on YouTube, and okay, well, where did you see it, and who authored it, and how do you know it's true? For me, it is, if you see something, most people consume news by whatever floats across their social media feed. And it might be really enticing to just believe it, especially if it confirms an existing belief. But I encourage everybody to Google it, see if you can independently confirm it via a legitimate source, whether that's like a government agency, maybe a nonprofit environmental conservancy, whatever the case may be, right? Whoever would be an expert in whatever claim is being made, that's the organization that you want to verify it from. It could be even Snopes, SNOPES.com is fantastic. I've used that resource numerous times. And then a legitimate news source, which doesn't always have to be the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. Even some of these new upstart news sources like the nonprofits, right? I guess that would be me, Suncoast Searchlight, upstart. But I would go on a news site and make sure, do they have an editorial policy? Do they have an ethics policy? Are there real people writing this news? Who are they? Can I contact them directly? Do they have if I flag something that's erroneous, does somebody respond to me? Do they actually correct their stories online? These are the things that I'm looking for. I've seen some investigative news sites where the reporters' names look like pseudonyms and there's no photo of them, there's no biography of them, there's no way to flag if something's erroneous. Those are red flags for me. And so it doesn't matter whether it's a right-leaning publication or a left-leaning publication. All of them ought to have, and for what it's worth, there's always been right-leaning, left-leaning publications. From the inside, as news organizations lurched from one strategy to the next to try to make up the revenue that they ceded when the internet took away classified ads and took away, the real estate listings and the automobile advertisements and all those things that really drove our revenue. I mean, the subscriptions from individual readers helped, but that was a drop in the bucket compared to ad revenue. And digital ads are a fraction of what print ads were, which is why we still have the print product today. I bet you they would all scrap it if they could, but the print ad is still more profitable than digital ads, which is why we have those newspapers. One of the biggest strategies that USA Today had for a while was to write stories that hit keywords that people were searching online. So, you could go to Google and see what people were searching. And so they would write stories that would, satisfy those search terms. And then those stories would be at the top and people would click at them. Well, when Google introduced AI overview, it decimated that. I mean, that entire business strategy folded in a heartbeat. And I saw that time and again. We relied on Facebook to get our stories out. Well, then Facebook started downplaying posts from news organizations, and that wiped that part out. So we're constantly, once you seeded the platform, once people stopped getting the paper, very few people actually go to NewYorkTimes.com or have that app on their phone. They're consuming news via social media. And so we are relying on those platforms to publish our work. And they, at the drop of a hat, can change their business model, and then we're scrambling.
Actually, you basically just answered my question, which is what are you doing to effectively get out on social media, since you said that's where most people read the news. But you basically just answered it.
Yeah, we're trying. I've had some ideas that I've shared, but with people at USA Today, I think personally, you can take this and run with it, but I think news organizations ought to create their own form of social media so people can go and interact on news stories and debate news stories with other people, not just in the comment section, but we have this thing called Parsley and Chartbeat, which is how we track our metrics, and they have this overlay. So if I go to the homepage of, and I don't have this at Suncoast Searchlight, but if I have this tracking software, I can go on my own page at USA Today and I can see, oh, there's this many people reading this homepage right now. This many people are on this story and this many people are on this story. And you click that story. This is how far down the story the average person gets, right? 3 paragraphs, 4 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs. And then you can go and you can update your story. Well, maybe if I put a different headline on, maybe if I do this, can I get more people down? Yeah, I get more people to click the story. I get more people further down the story. It's fascinating. I feel like we should make that available to the average reader so they can see there's 3,000 people reading this, story right now. 10 of them are your friends. And maybe you could chat with your friends, or maybe you could chat with the reporter who wrote that story directly. I think if you made it more interactive, more people would go to those news sites, but
Emily, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Let's thank Emily. Very informative. Well, I'm off my soapbox, and thank everybody for coming tonight. Meeting adjourned.